The morning mist hung low over Nashville as autumn painted the city in shades of gold and crimson. Inside his modest home office on Music Row, Garth Brooks sat surrounded by the familiar chaos of tour schedules, contract negotiations, and fan mail that seemed to multiply overnight. The October air carried the scent of fallen leaves through his open window, mixing with the aroma of coffee that had long since grown cold. At 58, Garth had seen it all. 3 decades in country music had brought him face to face with every conceivable request, from marriage proposals written in glitter to business ventures that promised to make him even richer. His assistant, Rebecca Martinez, had developed an almost supernatural ability to sort through the mountains of correspondence, filtering out the genuine from the opportunistic. "Morning, Garth," Rebecca called from the outer office, her voice carrying the slight accent that betrayed her Texas roots. "Got the usual stack here. Plus something that came through yesterday's mail that I thought you might want to see personally." Garth looked up from the tour itinerary he'd been reviewing, his weathered hands pausing over the papers. Rebecca had been with him for 12 years, and in all that time she'd rarely flagged personal mail unless it was truly special. She appeared in his doorway, holding a simple white envelope that looked almost fragile in her hands. "What makes this one different?" he asked, setting down his reading glasses and leaning back in his leather chair. "It's handwritten, for starters. Real handwriting, not the kind people do when they're trying to look fancy. And," she paused, studying the envelope, "I don't know. There's something about it. The person who wrote this took time. Real time." Garth extended his hand, and Rebecca placed the envelope gently in his palm. The paper was standard office stock, nothing expensive, but the address was written in careful cursive that spoke of someone who still believed in the power of words put to paper. No return address, just his name and the office location written with the kind of precision that suggested multiple drafts. He slid his finger under the flap, careful not to tear the envelope, and withdrew 2 sheets of lined paper. The handwriting was the same careful script, each letter formed with deliberate attention. At the top, in slightly bolder strokes, was written, "To Garth Brooks, from someone who believes in the power of music to heal. Dear Mr. Brooks, my name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm writing this letter knowing full well you probably receive thousands like it every week. I'm not writing to ask for an autograph or to tell you how much your music means to me, though it means more than I could ever express in words. I'm writing because I believe you're the kind of person who might understand what I'm about to ask. I work as a pediatric nurse at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital here in Nashville. Every day, I see children fighting battles that would break most adults. Some of them are 5 years old and facing their 3rd surgery. Others are teenagers who know they might not see their next birthday. But you know what amazes me most about these kids? They still find reasons to smile." Garth felt his chest tighten as he read, the words painting pictures in his mind of small faces he'd never seen, but could somehow envision clearly. He adjusted his position in the chair, unconsciously leaning forward as the letter drew him deeper into Sarah's world. "Last week, I was working the night shift in our long-term care ward. It was around 2 a.m., and most of the children were asleep. But I could hear soft singing coming from room 304. When I looked in, I saw Emma Richardson, an 8-year-old with leukemia, singing Friends in Low Places to her stuffed bear. She had every word memorized, and she was singing it like it was the most important song in the world. When I asked her where she learned it, she told me her daddy used to play your music in the car before she got sick. She said it made her feel strong. Then she asked me something that broke my heart. Miss Sarah, do you think Garth Brooks would ever sing for kids like me? The ones who can't go to concerts? I didn't know what to tell her, Mr. Brooks. How do you explain to a child that the world doesn't always work that way? That some dreams are too big? Too complicated? Too impossible? Garth set the letter down for a moment, running his hand through his graying hair. Through his window, he could see the Nashville skyline, the city that had given him everything he'd ever dreamed of, and more. But suddenly, those towering buildings seemed small compared to the request he sensed was coming. But then, I got to thinking, what if it's not impossible? What if there's someone out there who still believes that music can bridge any gap, heal any hurt, reach any child who needs it? So here's my unusual request, and I hope you'll forgive me for being so bold. Would you consider doing a small, private concert for the children in our long-term care unit? I'm not talking about anything grand or public. No cameras, no press, no publicity. Just you, your guitar, and about 20 children who could use a reminder that there's still magic in the world. I know this is asking a lot. I know you have obligations and schedules and a million demands on your time. I'm not even sure this letter will reach you personally. But I had to try, because sometimes the most important things we do are the ones nobody else will ever know about. If this is something you might consider, you can reach me at the number below. If not, please know that just reading this far means more than you could imagine. With hope and respect, Sarah Mitchell, RN Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. At the bottom of the page, written in smaller script, was a phone number and a brief postscript. P.S. Emma wanted me to tell you that she thinks you probably smell like Christmas trees and guitar strings. I thought you should know. Garth read the letter twice more, each pass revealing new layers of meaning in Sarah's careful words. This wasn't a request born of selfishness or star-struck fascination. This was a plea from someone who had seen too much pain and was desperately searching for ways to bring light into dark places. Rebecca had been watching from the doorway, recognizing the change in his expression. "What is it, Garth?" He handed her the letter without speaking, watching as her eyes moved across the pages. He saw the exact moment when she reached Emma's question about concerts, saw her hand rise unconsciously to her throat as she continued reading. "Oh my God," she whispered when she finished. "This is real," Garth finished. "This is the most real thing I've read in years." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had shaped his career. Somewhere out there, in a hospital room he'd never seen, a little girl named Emma Richardson was fighting for her life while singing his songs to a stuffed bear. The thought hit him like a physical blow, not painful, but clarifying, the way truth often struck when it arrived unexpectedly. "Rebecca, clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon. Garth, you have the meeting with Sony and the rehearsal for—" "Clear it," he said, turning back to face her. "And get me the number for Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. I need to speak with someone in administration. You're really going to do this, aren't you?" Garth looked at the letter again, at Sarah's careful handwriting and her postscript about Christmas trees and guitar strings. Somewhere in those words was everything he'd forgotten about why he'd started making music in the first place. It wasn't about charts or sales or awards. It was about connection, about reaching across the darkness and offering whatever light you had to give. "Rebecca, I've played for presidents and kings, sold out stadiums with 100,000 people screaming my name, but I've never done anything that mattered as much as this is going to matter." He picked up his phone, dialing the number Sarah had provided. As it rang, he thought about Emma Richardson and her stuffed bear, about a nurse who cared enough to write to a stranger, about all the children lying in hospital beds who had never asked to be there, but were finding ways to sing anyway. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, a tired but professional voice answered, "Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, 7th floor nursing station. This is Sarah." "Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes, this is Sarah. How can I help you?" Garth took a deep breath. knowing that the next words would change everything for both of them. "Sarah, this is Garth Brooks. I got your letter." The silence on the other end lasted so long that Garth wondered if the call had dropped. Then he heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like a chair being pushed back quickly. Mr. Brooks, this is really... You're really calling me?" "I am. And Sarah, I want you to know that what you wrote in that letter, it's exactly what I needed to read today. Tell me about Emma. Tell me about all of them." As Sarah began to speak, her voice growing stronger with each word, Garth felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just a phone call anymore. This was the beginning of something that would remind him why he'd fallen in love with music in the first place, and why sometimes the most important stages were the smallest ones. Outside his window, Nashville continued its daily rhythm, unaware that in a modest office on Music Row, a country music superstar was about to embark on the most meaningful performance of his career. The next morning brought the kind of crisp Tennessee autumn that made Nashville feel like the center of the universe. Garth had barely slept, his mind churning through conversations with Sarah Mitchell that had stretched well past midnight. What had started as a simple phone call had evolved into something deeper, a window into a world he'd never truly understood, despite decades of singing about life's struggles and triumphs. By 7 a.m., he was dressed and ready, having traded his usual jeans and casual shirt for slacks and a button-down that Rebecca had insisted made him look appropriately hospital professional. His truck sat in the driveway, loaded with 2 acoustic guitars, a small amplifier, and a nervousness he hadn't felt since his first Grand Ole Opry performance. "You sure about this approach?" Rebecca asked, as she handed him a thermos of coffee and the folder she'd compiled overnight. Going in unannounced could be a disaster if word gets out. Garth had considered the risks. A surprise visit from a country music superstar to a children's hospital could create chaos, draw unwanted media attention, and turn Sarah's simple request into a circus. But something about their phone conversation had convinced him that the direct approach was the only honest one. "Sarah isn't looking for publicity, Rebecca. If I show up with an entourage and security and all the usual fanfare, I'm missing the entire point of what she asked for." He paused, looking at the folder. "What did you find out about her?" Rebecca opened the file, revealing printouts and notes she'd gathered through careful research. Sarah Mitchell, 34 years old, originally from Knoxville. Been at Vanderbilt for 8 years. Started in general pediatrics and moved to long-term care 3 years ago. Her colleagues describe her as the nurse who never gives up and someone who treats every child like her own. She flipped to another page. Lost her younger brother to cancer when she was in college. That's apparently what pushed her into pediatric oncology. Never married, no kids of her own. But the hospital staff say she's practically a mother to every child in that ward. Garth absorbed this information, feeling the weight of Sarah's story settling around him like a familiar song. This wasn't just professional dedication. This was personal mission, born from loss and transformed into purpose. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "I talked to Dr. Patricia Williams, the head of pediatric oncology. She says Sarah has been trying for years to get funding for a music therapy program. Apparently, she's seen firsthand how music helps the kids cope. But the hospital budget?" She shrugged. "You know how it is with healthcare funding." The drive to the hospital took 20 minutes through Nashville's morning traffic, giving Garth time to think about what he was about to do. This wasn't a concert or a performance in any traditional sense. This was something entirely new, something that required him to set aside the persona he'd built over 3 decades and simply be present for children who needed what music could offer. Vanderbilt Children's Hospital rose from the Nashville landscape like a beacon of hope wrapped in brick and glass. The building was modern, designed with the kind of careful attention to detail that spoke of architects who understood they were creating more than just a medical facility. They were building a place where families would face their darkest moments and, hopefully, find their way back to light. Garth parked in the visitor's lot, grabbed his guitar case, and walked toward the main entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing a lobby that managed to be both impressive and welcoming. Children's artwork covered one wall, a riot of colors and imagination that spoke of young artists determined to create beauty, despite their circumstances. The information desk was staffed by a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that had clearly seen it all. Her name tag read, "Volunteer Margaret Thompson." "Good morning," Garth said, approaching the desk with what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "I'm here to see Sarah Mitchell in pediatric long-term care." Margaret looked up from her computer screen, and Garth watched recognition flicker across her features. To her credit, she maintained her professional composure, though her eyebrows raised slightly. "Mr. Brooks? Garth Brooks?" "Yes, ma'am. Sarah is expecting me." Margaret glanced around the lobby, perhaps looking for cameras or security personnel. Of course. Let me call up to the 7th floor." She reached for the phone, then paused. "Mr. Brooks, I just want to say, my grandson loves your music. He's been fighting leukemia for 2 years, and your songs, they help him feel strong." Garth felt his throat tighten. "What's his name?" "Tyler. Tyler Thompson. He's not in the long-term unit. He's doing better now, thanks to God. But he talks about your music all the time." "Maybe I'll get to meet him today," Garth said, meaning it completely. Margaret made the call, and within minutes, Garth found himself in an elevator climbing toward the 7th floor. The hospital's atmosphere changed as he rose, the lobby's cheerful chaos giving way to the quieter intensity of serious medical care. By the time the doors opened on the 7th floor, he was fully immersed in the world Sarah had described in her letter. The pediatric long-term care unit was designed with children in mind, but it couldn't disguise its fundamental purpose. Colorful murals decorated the walls, and child-sized furniture filled a common area. But the underlying reality was unmistakable. This was where children came when their illnesses required extended treatment, when home was temporarily impossible. Sarah Mitchell was waiting by the elevator, and Garth recognized her immediately from their phone conversation. She was smaller than he'd imagined, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and scrubs decorated with tiny musical notes, a detail that made him smile. Her face showed the kind of controlled exhaustion that healthcare workers wore like a uniform, but her eyes were bright, with an energy that spoke of deep purpose. "Mr. Brooks," she said, extending her hand, "I still can't quite believe you're here." "Sarah," he replied, taking her hand and finding it surprisingly strong. "After our conversation last night, I couldn't be anywhere else." She led him down a corridor lined with patient rooms, each door decorated with the name and artwork of its occupant. Through open doorways, Garth caught glimpses of the unit's residents. Children of various ages connected to different types of medical equipment. Some reading, others playing quiet games, all of them dealing with circumstances that would challenge adults twice their age. "I want you to meet someone before we talk about the logistics," Sarah said, stopping outside a door marked Emma Richardson, age 8, room 304. Through the small window, Garth could see a little girl with a fuzzy scalp where hair was slowly growing back, sitting up in bed and carefully arranging a collection of stuffed animals. "Is that Emma, the one who asked about concerts for kids like her?" Sarah knocked gently on the doorframe. "Emma, sweetie, I have someone here who wanted to meet you." Emma looked up, and Garth felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. She was tiny, made even smaller by the hospital bed and medical equipment surrounding her. But her eyes held an alertness and curiosity that seemed to fill the room. "Emma," Sarah continued, "this is my friend Garth. He heard you like music." Emma studied Garth with the direct, uncomplicated gaze that only children possess. "You look like someone famous," she said after a moment. "Are you famous?" Garth moved closer to her bed, careful not to disturb any of the equipment. "I play music for people. Some folks know my songs." "Do you know Friends in Low Places?" Emma asked, clutching a teddy bear that Garth now recognized as the one from Sarah's letter. "I do know that one," Garth said, pulling a chair closer to her bed. "In fact, I wrote it." Emma's eyes widened. "You wrote it? Like, you made up the words?" "I helped make up the words, yes." "That means—" Emma was clearly working through the implications. "That means you're Garth Brooks." The excitement in her voice was infectious. And Garth found himself grinning. "That's right. And Sarah told me you know all the words to that song." "I do. Want to hear?" Without waiting for an answer, Emma launched into a surprisingly accurate rendition of the chorus, her small voice carrying the melody with confidence that belied her age and circumstances. As she sang, Garth noticed other doors opening along the corridor. Children and teenage faces appeared, drawn by the sound of music and the unusual excitement in Emma's voice. Within moments, a small audience had gathered, some in wheelchairs, others walking slowly with IV poles, all of them curious about what was happening in room 304. "Emma," Garth said when she finished, "that was beautiful. But I was wondering, would you and your friends like to hear some music together? Maybe in that big room down the hall?" Emma's face lit up with a joy so pure it took Garth's breath away. "Really? You'd play music for all of us?" "That's exactly what I'd like to do." As word spread through the unit with the speed that only good news can achieve in a place that sees too little of it, Sarah began organizing what would become the most important concert of Garth Brooks' career. No stage, no lights, no thousands of screaming fans, just a handful of children who had been dealt impossible hands and were still finding reasons to sing. In the common room, as Sarah arranged chairs and Garth tuned his guitar, he realized that everything he thought he knew about performing was about to change. These children didn't need a superstar. They needed someone who understood that music was more than entertainment. It was medicine, hope, and connection, all wrapped up in melody and rhythm. Emma settled into the front row, her teddy bear in her lap, and looked up at Garth with complete trust. Around her, a dozen other children waited with the kind of anticipation that only comes from receiving an unexpected gift. "So," Garth said, settling his guitar across his knee, "what would you like to hear first?" The chorus of responses was immediate and enthusiastic, and for the first time in years, Garth Brooks felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Word of Garth's impromptu visit to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital spread through Nashville's music community with the speed of wildfire, but not in the way anyone might have expected. Instead of tabloid headlines or social media buzz, the story traveled through the quiet channels that connected the city's music industry. A text from a hospital security guard to his brother who worked sound at the Ryman. A mention in a conversation between studio musicians. A comment overheard in a coffee shop on Music Row. By the time Garth returned to his office that afternoon, his phone was ringing off the hook. But these weren't calls from reporters or publicity agents. They were from musicians, producers, and industry veterans who had heard fragments of the story and wanted to know if it was true and, more importantly, how they could help. "Garth, it's Keith!" came the voice of Keith Whitley Jr. through the speakerphone. "I heard from Danny that you spent the morning at the Children's Hospital." "Man, tell me that's true." Garth looked at Rebecca, who was fielding 3 other calls simultaneously while taking notes on a legal pad that was rapidly filling with names and offers. "It's true, Keith, and it's going to happen again. Count me in, brother. Whatever you're planning, I'm there." Similar calls continued throughout the day. Brad Paisley wanted to bring his guitar. Trisha Yearwood, who had been quietly supporting children's charities for years, offered to coordinate catering. Even Alan Jackson, who rarely made public appearances outside his own tours, called personally to volunteer his time. "You know me, Garth," Alan said in his distinctively laid-back drawl. "I don't usually go in for big productions or charity events that turn into publicity stunts. But what you're doing, that's different. That's the real thing." By evening, Garth's modest plan for a simple return visit to the hospital had evolved into something much larger and more complex. Sarah's request for a small, private concert was growing into a coordinated effort involving some of country music's biggest names. And Garth found himself both excited and terrified by the implications. "We need to be careful here," Rebecca warned as they reviewed the growing list of volunteers. "This could get out of hand fast. The last thing we want is to turn Sarah's quiet request into a media circus." Garth understood her concern. He'd seen how good intentions could be corrupted by too much attention, how genuine gestures could be twisted into publicity opportunities. But as he thought about Emma Richardson singing to her teddy bear, about the other children he'd met that morning, he realized that the risk was worth taking. "Call Dr. Williams at the hospital," he told Rebecca. "Set up a meeting for tomorrow morning. If we're going to do this right, we need to do it with their full cooperation and understanding." The next morning brought an unseasonably warm October day that felt more like late summer than fall. Dr. Patricia Williams met Garth and Rebecca in her office, a space that managed to balance medical professionalism with the warmth necessary for dealing with children and worried families. Her desk was covered with patient files, research papers, and photographs of children. Some current patients, others who had graduated to health or, as Garth realized with a heaviness in his chest, to whatever came after their battles ended. Dr. Williams was a woman in her early 50s, with graying brown hair and the kind of direct gaze that came from years of delivering both good and difficult news to families. She studied Garth with professional interest, clearly trying to reconcile the country music superstar with the man who had spent 2 hours playing guitar for sick children. "Mr. Brooks," she began, "I want to start by saying that what you did yesterday was remarkable. Sarah has been talking about it non-stop, and the children, well, let's just say yesterday was the best day we've had on that unit in months." "That's what I was hoping to hear," Garth replied. "But I also understand that what I'm proposing now is considerably more complicated." Dr. Williams nodded. "Sarah explained your expanded plans. Multiple musicians, a more formal concert setting, possible recording for the children to keep. It's generous beyond words, but I have to think about logistics, safety, and most importantly, the well-being of my patients." She pulled out a folder and opened it to reveal floor plans of the hospital and detailed notes. "The children in our long-term unit are dealing with compromised immune systems, ongoing treatments, and varying degrees of mobility. Some are tethered to equipment that can't be moved. Others are dealing with pain levels that fluctuate unpredictably." Garth leaned forward, studying the floor plans. What would work best for them? Ideally, we'd need flexibility. Some children could come to a central location. Others would need the music to come to them. We'd need to coordinate with treatment schedules, meal times, and medication administration. And, she paused, choosing her words carefully, we'd need to be prepared for the possibility that some children might not be able to participate if their condition changes. The weight of what Dr. Williams was describing settled over the room. This wasn't just about entertainment or even comfort. It was about bringing joy to children whose time was measured in treatments and procedures, whose futures were uncertain in ways that most people couldn't comprehend. "Dr. Williams," Garth said, "what if we made this completely flexible? What if instead of one big concert, we created a whole day of music that could adapt to whatever each child needs?" Her expression shifted, showing the first real enthusiasm she'd displayed since the meeting began. "What do you mean?" "Multiple small performances throughout the day. Acoustic sets that could move from room to room. Musicians who could sit bedside with individual children. A setup that puts the children's needs first and works around everything else." Rebecca was taking notes rapidly. "We could coordinate with nursing schedules, work around treatment times, maybe even incorporate some of the music into therapy sessions." Dr. Williams was nodding now, her medical mind clearly working through the possibilities. "That could work. That could really work. We'd need advanced planning, coordination with every department. But it could be exactly what these children need," Garth finished. Over the next 2 hours, they developed a plan that was ambitious in scope while remaining intimate in execution. The event would span an entire day, with different musicians rotating through various locations in the hospital. Children who were able would gather in the main common area for larger performances, while others would receive personalized visits in their rooms. Alan Jackson would perform in the early afternoon, when energy levels were typically highest. Brad Paisley would handle the evening session, known for his ability to connect with younger audiences. Trisha Yearwood would coordinate a special session for the teenage patients, understanding the unique challenges they faced. And Garth would anchor the day, moving throughout the hospital as needed, ensuring that every child who wanted to participate could do so. "There's one more thing," Dr. Williams said, as the meeting wound down. "I'd like to invite some of our other departments to participate. Music therapy, child life specialists, even some of our art therapy staff. This could be an opportunity to integrate multiple forms of healing." As they finalized details, Garth felt the project taking shape in his mind. This wasn't just a concert anymore. It was becoming a celebration of resilience, a day-long testament to the power of human connection in the face of unimaginable challenges. "When do you want to do this, Doctor?" Williams asked. Garth looked at Rebecca, who was already consulting her calendar. "How about 2 weeks from Saturday? That gives us time to coordinate everyone's schedules and handle all the logistics." "October 28th, Rebecca confirmed. "I can make that work." As they left the hospital, Garth felt a mixture of excitement and nervous energy that reminded him of the early days of his career, when every performance felt like it carried the weight of his dreams. But this was different. The stakes were higher because they weren't about his success or failure. They were about bringing light to children who desperately needed it. "You realize," Rebecca said, as they drove back toward Music Row, "this is going to be the most complicated production we've ever put together." "I know," Garth replied, watching Nashville's familiar skyline pass by the window. "And it's also going to be the most important." That evening, as calls continued to pour in from musicians wanting to participate, Garth sat in his home studio and played through some of his most beloved songs. Each melody carried new meaning now, filtered through the memory of Emma Richardson's voice and the faces of the other children he'd met. Music had always been his way of connecting with people, but he was beginning to understand that connection could go deeper than he'd ever imagined. The next 2 weeks would test every organizational skill he'd developed, every relationship he'd built in the music industry, and every ounce of his commitment to making this dream a reality. But as he played the opening chords to Friends in Low Places, he could hear Emma's voice joining his, and he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they were worth facing. In hospitals across the country, children were fighting battles that would define the rest of their lives. In Nashville, A community of musicians was about to remind them that they weren't fighting alone. October 28th dawned crisp and clear in Nashville, with the kind of perfect autumn weather that felt like a gift from the universe. By 6 a.m., Garth was already at the hospital, working with a crew of volunteers to transform various spaces throughout the children's unit into intimate performance venues. The transformation was subtle but meaningful. Acoustic panels to improve sound quality, comfortable seating arrangements that could accommodate wheelchairs and medical equipment, and small stages that could be quickly assembled and moved as needed. Sarah Mitchell had arrived even earlier, coordinating with the nursing staff to ensure that every child who wanted to participate could do so safely. Her clipboard was filled with schedules, medical considerations, and special requests that had accumulated over the past 2 weeks. Room 304, Emma's room, had been designated as a home base, with backup equipment and a comfortable space for musicians to rest between performances. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked Garth as they did a final walkthrough of the unit. "Nervous," he admitted. "I've played for crowds of 100,000 people, but this feels bigger somehow." Sarah understood. Over the past 2 weeks, as word of the event had spread through the hospital, she'd watched children who rarely showed excitement begin to anticipate something special. Emma had been practicing songs with her teddy bear, determined to be ready to sing along. 12-year-old Marcus Davis, who was fighting a rare bone cancer, had written his own song that he hoped to share. 15-year-old Jessica Park, normally withdrawn and angry about her situation, had asked if she could request specific songs. At 10 a.m., the first musicians began arriving. Alan Jackson entered through a side entrance, carrying his guitar case and wearing the kind of relaxed smile that immediately put the hospital staff at ease. He was followed by Brad Paisley, who had brought not just his guitars, but a collection of harmonicas that he thought the children might enjoy learning to play. "This is going to be something special," Alan said, as he tuned his guitar in the common room. "I can feel it already." Trisha Yearwood arrived with her own musical entourage, a keyboard player, a flutist, and, most importantly, a collection of songbooks that she'd compiled specifically for teenage patients. Her research into music therapy had convinced her that adolescents facing serious illness needed different approaches than younger children, and she'd spent weeks preparing material that would resonate with their unique challenges. By 11 a.m., the first performance was ready to begin. The common room had been arranged with chairs in a semicircle, creating an intimate theater that could accommodate about 20 children. Those who were able to leave their rooms had gathered, some in wheelchairs, others walking slowly with IV poles, all of them radiating anticipation despite their circumstances. Emma had claimed a front row seat, her teddy bear in her lap, and a shy smile on her face. Next to her sat Marcus, whose bald head was covered by a baseball cap that was too big for his thin frame. Jessica had chosen a seat in the back, maintaining the defensive posture that had become her signature. But Garth noticed that her eyes were bright with interest. "Good morning, everyone," Garth said as he settled onto a stool with his acoustic guitar. "We're here today because music has a way of bringing people together. And there's nowhere I'd rather be than right here, with all of you." He started with "Friends in Low Places," and within the first few bars, Emma's voice joined his, clear and confident. Other children began singing along, some strong and sure, others tentative but determined. The song became a conversation, with Garth leading and the children responding, their voices blending into something that was more than the sum of its parts. "That was beautiful," Garth said when the song ended. "Now, I heard that someone here wrote their own song. Marcus, would you like to share it with us?" Marcus looked surprised that he'd been remembered, then nodded shyly. With Garth's encouragement, he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and began to read lyrics that he'd written about courage, about fighting battles that others couldn't see, about finding strength in unexpected places. His voice was small but steady, and when he finished, the applause from his fellow patients was genuine and enthusiastic. The morning continued with a mix of familiar songs and personal moments. Alan Jackson joined for a duet on Chattahoochee that had the children clapping along despite various medical limitations. Brad Paisley brought out his harmonicas and taught several children basic techniques, creating an impromptu harmonica orchestra that filled the room with joyful noise. But it was during the quieter moments that the real magic happened. When Garth noticed that 10-year-old Ashley Morgan was having trouble staying awake due to her medication, he moved his chair next to hers and played a gentle version of The Dance that was more lullaby than performance. When 7-year-old David Chen started crying because the music reminded him of home, Trisha Yearwood sat beside him and turned his tears into a conversation about family and missing the people we love. As the day progressed, the musicians began rotating through individual rooms, bringing personalized concerts to children who couldn't join the larger gatherings. Garth found himself in room 318 with 16-year-old Maria Santos, who was fighting lymphoma and had been too weak to leave her bed for several days. "I heard you like music," he said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "I used to sing in my church choir," Maria replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before all this." "What was your favorite song to sing?" "Amazing Grace. My grandmother taught it to me when I was little." Garth began playing the familiar melody, and Maria's voice joined his, gaining strength as the song progressed. By the final verse, she was singing with a power that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her physical condition, her voice carrying both her pain and her hope in equal measure. In room 310, Alan Jackson discovered 9-year-old Timothy Walker, who had been in the hospital for 6 months following complications from a heart transplant. Timothy was shy and hadn't spoken much to anyone except his nurses. But when Alan started playing Little Bitty, something changed in the boy's expression. "You know this one?" Alan asked gently. Timothy nodded and, in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, began singing along. His parents, who had been maintaining bedside vigil for months, watched with tears streaming down their faces as their son engaged with music in a way he hadn't engaged with anything since his surgery. Meanwhile, Brad Paisley had set up in the teenage wing, where the challenges were different but equally profound. 15-year-old Jake Mitchell, who was dealing with the aftermath of a traumatic brain injury, had lost much of his ability to communicate verbally. But when Brad played Mud on the Tires, Jake's hands began moving in rhythm, and his face lit up with recognition and joy. "Music reaches parts of the brain that other things can't touch," explained Dr. Lisa Chen, the hospital's music therapist, who had been observing the day's events with professional fascination. "What you're seeing here isn't just entertainment. It's actually therapeutic intervention." Jessica Park, the withdrawn 15-year-old who had initially hung back during the group performances, found herself drawn into conversation with Trisha Yearwood during an afternoon session focused on teenage patients. Trisha had chosen songs that spoke to themes of independence, strength, and overcoming adversity, messages that resonated deeply with adolescents who were fighting adult battles while still figuring out who they wanted to become. "I used to want to be a singer," Jessica admitted during a quiet moment between songs. "Before all this happened." "What's stopping you now?" Trisha asked. "I don't know if I'll..." Jessica struggled with the words. "I don't know what my future looks like anymore." Trisha set down her guitar and moved closer to Jessica's wheelchair. "Honey, none of us know what our future looks like. The difference is that you're facing that uncertainty with more courage than most adults ever have to find." She picked up her guitar again and began playing The Climb, a song about perseverance and finding strength in the struggle itself. Jessica's voice joined in tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, until she was singing with the kind of passion that comes from truly understanding the lyrics' meaning. As the afternoon wore on, something remarkable began happening throughout the hospital unit. Children who had been isolated in their individual struggles were finding connection through shared musical experiences. Parents who had been carrying unbearable worry were finding moments of joy watching their children engage with something beyond their medical conditions. And the medical staff, who dealt daily with the weight of serious illness, were witnessing the healing power of music in ways that textbooks couldn't capture. Dr. Williams made rounds throughout the day, officially checking on her patients but also observing the impact of the musical interventions. She found children who had been withdrawn and depressed actively participating in group sing-alongs. She saw pain levels decrease during gentle acoustic sessions. Most remarkably, she witnessed improved cooperation with medical procedures from children who had been struggling with treatment compliance. "This is exactly what Sarah envisioned," she told Garth during a brief break between performances. "But it's become something even bigger than any of us imagined." The climax of the day came during the early evening, when all the musicians gathered in the main common room for a finale that would include every child who was able to participate. The room was packed with patients, family members, and hospital staff, creating an audience that was both intimate and diverse. Emma Richardson, who had started the entire chain of events with her innocent question about concerts for kids like her, was given the honor of introducing the final song. She stood carefully, still connected to her IV pole, and addressed the crowded room with the confidence of someone who understood she was part of something historic. "Before today," she said, her 8-year-old voice carrying clearly through the room, "I thought that being sick meant missing out on all the good stuff. But today taught me that sometimes the best stuff comes to you, especially when you're surrounded by people who care." She looked directly at Garth, then at the other musicians who had given their day to this cause. "Thank you for showing us that music doesn't just happen on big stages. Sometimes it happens right where you need it most." The final song was "Amazing Grace," chosen because it was familiar to children from many different backgrounds and carried themes of hope and redemption that resonated with their shared experience. As voices joined together, patients, families, musicians, and medical staff, the boundaries that usually separated performers from audience dissolved completely. Garth looked around the room as he played, taking in faces that told stories of struggle and resilience. Emma was singing with her whole heart. Marcus was swaying gently to the rhythm despite his pain. Jessica had moved her wheelchair closer to the front and was harmonizing beautifully with Tricia. And Maria, who had seemed too weak to participate just hours earlier, was singing from her wheelchair with a strength that defied her physical condition. But it was Timothy Walker who provided the day's most powerful moment. The shy boy who hadn't spoken much to anyone in months suddenly stood up from his wheelchair, walked slowly to the center of the room, and in a clear, sweet voice, sang the final verse of "Amazing Grace" as a solo. His parents wept openly. The medical staff applauded through their tears, and every person in that room understood they were witnessing something sacred. As the song ended and the applause began, Garth felt a profound shift in his understanding of what music could accomplish. This wasn't about entertainment or even charity. It was about human connection at its most fundamental level. It was about using whatever gifts you had to reach across the darkness and offer light to those who needed it most. The day officially ended around 8 p.m., but the impact would continue long after the guitars were packed away and the temporary stages were dismantled. Children who had participated would carry the memory of this day through whatever challenges lay ahead. Families would have new reasons to hope, and the medical staff would have witnessed proof that healing involved more than just medical intervention. Sarah Mitchell stood in the now quiet common room, watching as the last of the equipment was cleaned up. The space would return to its normal function tomorrow. But something had changed in the atmosphere of the entire unit. There was a lightness, a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. "Sarah," Garth said, approaching her as he prepared to leave, "I want you to know that this day changed me as much as I hope it changed them." "You gave these children something they'll never forget," Sarah replied. "You showed them that they matter, that their struggles are seen, that they are not alone." "We showed them that," Garth corrected. "This started with your courage to write a letter and ask for something that seemed impossible." As Garth packed his guitar and prepared to return to his normal life, he carried with him the voices of children who had found reasons to sing despite circumstances that would challenge anyone's faith. Emma's enthusiastic harmonies, Marcus's original song about courage, Jessica's powerful vocals on "The Climb," Timothy's brave solo performance. All of these moments had become part of his own story, reminders of why music mattered beyond charts and sales and industry recognition. The drive home through Nashville's evening traffic gave him time to process what had happened. This had been more than a concert. It had been a testimony to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of community to create healing. It had been a reminder that sometimes the most important performances happen in the smallest venues, for the most personal reasons. Tomorrow, the story of this day would begin to spread beyond the hospital walls, but tonight it belonged to the children who had participated and the people who had witnessed their courage. In a world that often seemed divided and harsh, a group of sick children and generous musicians had created something beautiful together, proving that hope was not just possible but inevitable when people chose to care for one another. The story broke 3 days later, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of a carefully crafted press release or strategic media announcement, it emerged organically through the most powerful form of communication in the digital age: authentic human storytelling. It started with Jennifer Richardson, Emma's mother, who had been documenting her daughter's cancer journey through a personal blog read by family and friends. On Wednesday morning, she posted a simple entry titled "The Day Music Came to Us," accompanied by a photo of Emma singing alongside Garth Brooks, her face radiant with joy despite the medical equipment surrounding her. "I've written dozens of posts about Emma's journey, about treatments and setbacks and small victories," Jennifer wrote. "But yesterday, something happened that I'm still trying to find words for." A nurse named Sarah Mitchell received an answer to a letter that most people would never have the courage to send. And because of her compassion and Garth Brooks's generous heart, "My daughter experienced something magical." The blog post was shared by a family friend on Facebook, then reposted by someone who worked in Nashville's music industry, then picked up by a local radio DJ who read portions of it on his morning show. Within hours, the story was spreading through social media with the kind of organic momentum that publicists spend fortunes trying to create, but rarely achieve. But this wasn't a typical celebrity charity story. The details that captured people's attention were the small, human moments. Emma singing "Friends in Low Places" to her teddy bear, Marcus sharing his original song about courage, Timothy Walker's brave solo performance of "Amazing Grace." For T, these weren't photo opportunities or publicity stunts. They were genuine moments of connection that resonated with anyone who had ever faced difficulty or watched someone they loved struggle. By Thursday morning, Garth's office was fielding calls from media outlets across the country. But the response was overwhelmingly positive and respectful. Rather than sensationalizing the story or turning it into celebrity gossip, most reporters seemed to understand they were covering something meaningful and handled it with appropriate sensitivity. Good Morning America requested an interview, but wanted to focus on the children's stories rather than the celebrity angle. 60 Minutes called about a possible segment on music therapy in pediatric care. Rolling Stone wanted to write a feature about musicians using their platforms for direct community impact. "This is unprecedented," Rebecca told Garth, as they reviewed media requests. "Usually when a story like this breaks, we get a mix of positive coverage and people looking for angles to criticize. But everyone seems to understand that this was special." The most surprising response came from other musicians, both within and outside the country music community. By Friday, Garth's phone was ringing constantly with artists wanting to know how they could organize similar events in their own communities. Keith Urban called from Australia, where he was touring, asking for contact information for children's hospitals in Nashville. Dolly Parton, who had been quietly supporting children's literacy programs for years, wanted to explore ways to integrate music into her existing charitable work. "What you did," Dolly told Garth during a phone conversation that lasted nearly an hour, "it reminded all of us why we got into music in the first place. It wasn't for the money or the fame. It was because music has the power to heal, to connect, to make people feel less alone." But the most meaningful responses came from the medical community. Dr. Williams found herself fielding calls from pediatric hospitals across the country, asking for advice on implementing similar programs. The American Academy of Pediatrics reached out about featuring the Vanderbilt event in their journal. Music therapy programs that had been struggling for funding suddenly found themselves with renewed support and interest. "You've started something here," Dr. Williams told Garth during a follow-up meeting the following week. "Hospitals that have never considered music therapy are now asking how to develop programs. Medical schools are asking about incorporating arts-based healing into their curricula." The impact on the children who had participated was equally profound, but more personal. Emma Richardson, who had struggled with depression related to her treatment, showed marked improvement in her mood and cooperation with medical procedures. Her oncologist, Dr. Robert Kim, noted that her pain medication requirements had decreased and her overall attitude had shifted dramatically. "It's not unusual for children to have good days during treatment," Dr. Kim explained to Emma's parents. "But what we're seeing here is a sustained improvement in her overall outlook. She talks constantly about the music day, about the songs she learned, about the connections she made. It's given her something positive to associate with her hospital experience." Marcus Davis had been inspired to continue writing songs and was working with the hospital's music therapist to develop his compositions. His latest song, titled "Warriors in Small Bodies," was being considered for inclusion in a compilation album that the hospital was developing to support their music therapy program. Jessica Park, the withdrawn teenager who had initially resisted participation, had requested guitar lessons and was working toward performing at the hospital's next monthly family gathering. Her transformation from angry and isolated to engaged and hopeful was, according to her medical team, as significant as any medical intervention she'd received. Timothy Walker, whose brave solo performance had moved everyone present, was speaking more freely with his medical team and showing improved cognitive function. His speech therapist believed that the musical engagement had activated neurological pathways that were crucial for his continued recovery. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was on Sarah Mitchell herself. The nurse who had written a simple letter asking for a small favor found herself at the center of a movement that was transforming how medical institutions thought about healing and patient care. "I never imagined that one letter could lead to all this," Sarah told a reporter from the Nashville scene. "But I think it shows that when you advocate for your patients, when you're willing to ask for what they need, even if it seems impossible, amazing things can happen." Sarah had been invited to speak at medical conferences about patient advocacy and the integration of arts into healthcare. Several hospitals had offered her positions developing music therapy programs. A publisher was interested in her writing a book about her experiences in pediatric oncology nursing, but she remained focused on her patients at Vanderbilt. "This attention is flattering," she said, "but my priority is still the children in my unit. They're the ones who taught me that healing involves more than just medical treatment." The success of the Vanderbilt event inspired a nationwide movement that became known as music medicine, a grassroots effort to bring musical experiences directly to children in medical facilities. Unlike traditional charity concerts or fundraising events, these were intimate, patient-centered experiences designed around the specific needs of hospitalized children. Alan Jackson organized a similar event at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis. Brad Paisley worked with children's hospitals in his home state of West Virginia. Tricia Yearwood partnered with facilities in Oklahoma and Texas. Each event was tailored to the specific needs and culture of its host institution, but all shared the same core principle: putting the children's needs first and using music as a tool for healing and connection. The movement spread beyond country music. Rock artists, pop stars, classical musicians, and local performers began organizing their own versions of music medicine events. A network developed, sharing best practices and coordinating efforts to ensure that no single hospital was overwhelmed with offers while others went without. 3 months after the original Vanderbilt event, Garth received a letter that brought the story full circle. It was from Emma Richardson, written in the careful handwriting of an 8-year-old who was taking her time to get every word right. "Dear Mr. Brooks, my mom helped me write this letter because I wanted to tell you something important. Last week, I got to ring the bell that means my treatment is finished. The doctors say I'm going to be okay, but that's not the most important thing I wanted to tell you. The most important thing is that the day you came to sing for us changed how I think about being sick. Before that day, I thought being in the hospital meant I was broken and that broken things couldn't do anything good. But when you played music with us, when you let Marcus sing his song, and when Timothy sang all by himself, I learned that even when our bodies are sick, our hearts can still make beautiful things. I learned that being in the hospital doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're getting fixed. And while you're getting fixed, you can still bring joy to other people. I wanted you to know that every time I hear friends in low places now, I remember that day, and I remember that music can happen anywhere, even in hospitals, even when you're scared, even when you don't know what's going to happen next. Thank you for showing me that the best concerts aren't always the biggest ones. Love, Emma Richardson, P.S. I still think you smell like Christmas trees and guitar strings. And now I know that's the best smell in the world." Garth read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of meaning in Emma's carefully chosen words. This 8-year-old girl, who had faced challenges that would test most adults, had articulated something profound about the nature of healing, community, and the power of human connection. He thought about Sarah Mitchell's original letter, about her courage to ask for something that seemed impossible. He thought about the dozens of musicians who had volunteered their time without expectation of recognition or reward. He thought about the medical professionals who had opened their facility to an unprecedented experiment in healing. But mostly, he thought about the children, Emma and Marcus and Jessica and Timothy and all the others who had shown him that resilience wasn't just about surviving difficult circumstances. It was about finding ways to create beauty and connection and hope in the midst of those circumstances. The letter from Emma was now framed on his office wall, next to platinum albums and industry awards that suddenly seemed less significant than this simple thank you note from a little girl who had learned to sing through her struggle. 6 months later, when Garth received a Grammy Award for his latest album, he used his acceptance speech to talk not about his own music, but about the music that had emerged from a children's hospital in Nashville. He spoke about Sarah Mitchell's courage to advocate for her patients, about Emma Richardson's wisdom about where the best concerts happen, about the community of caregivers and musicians who had proven that healing was a collaborative effort. Music, he said, holding the Grammy Award but looking directly into the camera, isn't about how many people you can reach, or how loud you can play, or how high you can climb on the charts. Music is about connection. It's about reaching across whatever divides us, illness, fear, uncertainty, and finding the common humanity that makes us all part of the same song. The audience applauded, but Garth was thinking about a hospital room in Nashville, about children who had taught him more about music in a single day than 30 years in the industry had managed to accomplish. Somewhere in that room, he knew, Emma Richardson was probably singing along with her teddy bear, Marcus Davis was working on new lyrics about courage, and Sarah Mitchell was caring for a new group of children who needed advocates brave enough to ask for the impossible. The letter that had started it all, Sarah's simple request for a small concert for children who couldn't attend regular shows, had become something far larger than anyone had imagined. It had become a reminder that the most important work happens not on the biggest stages, but in the smallest spaces where human beings choose to care for one another. And in hospitals across the country, children were learning that being sick didn't mean being broken, that healing involved more than just medicine, and that sometimes the most beautiful music happens exactly where you need it most. The story continued to ripple outward, carried by the voices of children who had learned to sing through their struggles, and adults who had remembered why music mattered in the first place. It was a story without an ending, because every day brought new opportunities for connection, new chances to use whatever gifts you had to bring light to dark places, new reminders that the best concerts often happen for audiences of one. In Nashville, where music was both industry and art, business and calling, the story of Garth Brooks and Sarah Mitchell's letter had become something more than entertainment news. It had become a testament to the possibility that still existed when people chose compassion over convenience, when they were willing to ask for what seemed impossible and work to make it real. And somewhere in a pediatric ward, another nurse was probably writing another letter, asking another impossible question, ready to start another chain of connection that would remind the world that healing happens not just through medicine, but through the countless small acts of love that human beings offer to each other in times of need.